Union of European Federalists. In her recent State of the Union speech, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the fight of democracy against autocracy a top priority for Europe. Since several years, we see a corrosion of democratic principles in some European countries, for example, in Hungary. Right-wing politics is on the uprise in many other European countries. Vladimir Putin brought war to the continent and is explicitly targeting European democratic values. In the next few minutes, we will focus on the questions of effective counteraction. What can be done to strengthen democracy and to peacefully fight the authoritarian developments that threaten a democratic Europe? At this point, a very warm welcome to Professor Paul Lendvadai. Thank you for being with us today.
Hello.
Professor Lendvadai is an institution when it comes to topics like Europe, to Eastern Europe specifically, and especially to Hungary. You were born in Budapest in 1929 and live in Vienna since 1957. There is a lot to tell about your life. I will just name some of the many stations. You have been a lifelong political publicist and journalist, from the London Financial Times in the beginning to the ORF, the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, where you still lead the Europa Studio. You wrote 20 books and received numerous national and international awards, and it is great to have you here. And let's start with the first question. The European Commission just proposed to cut the money flow to Hungary by 7.5 billion euro, which is, one wouldn't believe that, which is only 1/5 of the budget that Hungary gets. To what extent do you think is this procedure a sensible measure to restore the rule of law and democratic structure in Hungary?
Well, first of all, I think that the fate of a country depends primarily on its own political class and population. You cannot replace from the outside the population or the voters or the political will of a nation, but you can influence it. And Hungarians are very much in favor, according to our polls, in favor of belonging to the European Union. And there has been a growing dissatisfaction and disappointment that the European Union passed a number of resolutions, but nothing happened. So I think that any measure which shows to the Hungarian government that the European Union takes the case of democracy, the case of the legal constraints, the case of fighting against corruption is important. So in this sense, I think it can serve as a timely and irreplaceable warning to the government of Viktor Orban.
How big is the risk that lowering the money flow to Hungary will make Viktor Orban even more of an opponent of the EU, or even might help him to drive the population towards a Hungarian exit of the EU?
Well, to start with, Viktor Orban is a very cynical, very accomplished, very able politician who is willing to do anything to remain in power. This partly for the simple reason, as very often pointed out by Hungarian critics and observers, independent observers, because the entire leading group around him and his family profits from the flow of the money to Hungary. There is one major reason why Hungary hasn't joined yet the European Office of the Prosecutor, led by a very able and very hard-headed lady from Romania, because they are afraid of the international authorities discovering how much money has been put in the pocket of people who are the friends, who are the supporters, or even relatives of Viktor Orban. For instance, his young son-in-law within a couple of years, became the 30th richest man in Hungary. Anyhow, it is I have no fears that any resolution by the European Union will push Hungary towards leaving the European Union. Hungary gets 4 to 5% of the GDP from the European Union, and the fact that the government has immediately responded in the sense that they want to pass 13 or 15 laws in order to satisfy the European Union shows that they understood the message.
That would be my next question. What is actually asked from Hungary to change so that the funding will not be cut? What are the first steps Hungary would really need to take right now to avoid the funding cut?
In my opinion, the only step which would show that Hungary takes it seriously and they want to change would be to join the International Prosecutors, International European Union's Attorney General's office, that Hungary would be represented there as most of the members of the European Union. That would be the first. The second, that one should have a look at the steps they have taken so far to influence the legal status of Hungary. For instance, they appointed as the president of the Supreme Court someone who has never been a judge actually in his life. And 9 members of the elected committee of the judges in Hungary opposed his appointment a couple of years ago, because this man has the authority to appoint or to move judges and cases. Anyhow, these are only some of the things which one should do, not appointing or setting up offices staffed completely by people who are subservient to the government or connected directly with the government. Even so, the latest observation of the latest remarks of people in Hungary and they know is that the regime has been during the last 10, 12 years so changed that even these measures will only mean the beginning of the beginning to bring Hungary back to the course of the democratic, real democratic decision making.
To your opinion, what would have to happen in the media landscape actually to come back to a more democratic structure? Would you have some first ideas and steps that should happen?
Well, this is one of the most important questions which you raise. From the very beginning, the Hungarian government has done everything to kill independent radio, independent television, public television, and then there was practically a freeze of the advertising in independent papers, independent radios. All major papers have been taken over by the government or by oligarchs or very rich entrepreneurs who profit from this regime. So that except for a couple of high-level but very literary or intellectual weeklies with very small circulation, you can't find independent newspapers. All radio stations are in the hands of the government. So the first step would be, for instance, that there is one radio station called Club Radio, which was originally could be heard all over Hungary. It was in a first step restricted to Budapest that you could listen to this radio, and now you can't even listen there, only if you have a computer, then you can see or you can hear the programs But you know, most of the Hungarians of, I wouldn't say lower classes, but poorer people, particularly in the countryside, have no clever telephones or computers or laptops, and so they are actually separated from the news. 80% of the news spread in Hungary originates with the government. So the first step would be that this radio station, which was illegally divested of its possibilities, would be given back the right to broadcast all over Hungary. And number two, also, that they should be allowed to set up independent television outlets.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to congratulate you on your new book, Viel geprüftes Österreich. Austria Behind the Mask will be the English title. I think you have it here with you. It's really brand new, and you have it since last week, you told me. Austria has a kind of darker history, to be honest, of pro-Russian politicians. They drove the country, for example, into deep dependency when it comes to Russian oil and gas. You really discover a lot of scandals and awful things where we wouldn't, rather wouldn't like to look there, but very important that you write about it. So when you consider the relation in this case between Hungary and Vladimir Putin's Russia, do we have to worry that any disciplinary action from the EU might push Hungary even more into the hands of Mr. Putin?
Can't push it more than he is now at the beyond the point where he is. There is a bank established in Hungary which serves basically the interests of the Russian intelligence service. The Hungarians came out again repeatedly in the European Union against sanctions which would have hurt Russia. He gave a speech recently at a closed meeting, according to newspaper reports, which haven't been denied or officially denied, that where he said that the entire war is caused by the Western support for the Ukraine. So I don't think any measure taken by the European Union would push him more into the arms of Putin. Actually, it could only help to make it more independent. But I am afraid I am pessimistic. I say it very openly because I'm an independent observer, not because Viktor Orban is a very established liar and opportunist and a cynical operator, but because also there are there are governments like the Polish governments, which are also in trouble because of its infringement of the legal freedom, and also the lady in Italy who might become the next prime minister, Giorgia Meloni, already came out in support of Viktor Orban. So I think he will do his usual tricks, which is that he himself said that it is the peacock dance, that he pretends to give in, but on the basic issues, he retains his freedom of maneuver.
Mhm. You mentioned already Poland and Italy. Let's take a little bit a broader look before we come to the last question on Eastern Europe and South and Eastern Europe. Do you think there is a big threat now that the division of Europe into democratic Europe and an anti-democratic developing Europe is growing due to, for example, harsh measures of the EU that are taken now? That are perhaps reinforcing those people who are right-wing and anti-democratic oriented, or by Mr. Putin's efforts. Do you think that the division will grow in the next couple of months, years?
I think one cannot predict what will happen. Democracy cannot be calculated. That we have seen repeatedly. So we hadn't expected that there should be a very realistic government in Italy under Draghi, who was a fantastic, moderate and sensible banker, and is proved to be also a moderate and sensible politician. But in a country which had 68 governments since World War II, and where politicians always rose and then fell, you can't predict anything. And Italy is the third most important country in the European Union, economically, politically, after Germany and France. So, and also, of course, there is Hungary and Poland. And you can't really do anything within the European Union if you don't have a unanimous agreement by all the member states. And this also affects, unfortunately, the measures taken to defend or to restore democracy. So the European Union is bound to remain a project in construction, not completed, always full of contradictions, crises, and I don't think that anyone will have a second Brexit or a Polix or a Uxix or whatever we call it. I don't think so, because the entire situation in the United Kingdom shows that it was a suicidal, a very self-defeating step, which Boris Johnson, for purely political and power reasons, pushed through. So I don't think so, but one can never know. If I learned something in my career, is that you can't predict and you can't prophesy anything in politics.
So let's come to the last question, and it's about the power of the people. Actually, there is no democracy when no one goes for voting. The JEF, Austria, these are the Young European Federalists in Austria. They are a pro-European NGO with thousands of members. They now demand to spend the money that is saved from the cutting of funds in Hungary for capacity building of democracy organizations, allowing them to provide, for example, democracy educational and democracy fostering measures. Would you think this idea to be a meaningful and sensible use of the money?
I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it would be extremely useful. I would say even the interest which accumulates on 7.5 billion euro would be very welcome for many NGOs which have to rely on support. So I think go ahead, and I can only hope that the European Commission will act in concert, in accordance with the wishes of the vast majority of the freely elected European Parliament.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lendvadai, for your precious time, and all the best to you, and of course also for your brand new book, Vielgeprüftes Österreich. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Union of European Federalists.